All right, our story today is called The Spooky Tale of Prewitt Peacock by Bill Peet. If we were at school, we'd be reading a lot of Bill Peet stories because he is officially our author of the month in April. And, Easton, what do you want to say?
Hi.
He wants to say hello. All right, so The Spooky Tale of Prewitt Peacock by Bill Peet. Prewitt was a wild peacock who lived far out in the jungle where most wild peacocks live. However, Prewitt was not as proud as a peacock, for he had nothing at all to be proud of. A peacock's great pride is in his glorious tail with all the beautiful blue-green eye spots. Prewitt's tail was no more than a few scraggly feathers with only 2 eye spots. His was indeed a sad tale, and Prewitt was indeed a sad peacock. Phineas was the proudest of the peacocks, but then he had the most fanciful tail, with many more beautiful eye spots than the others, so he was naturally the leader of the flock. Wherever they went, Phineas always strutted proudly at the head of the procession with his tail fanned out in full glory. Last, and by far the least, came Prewitt, with his scraggly tail dragging behind him. But when it came to facing a tiger, the other peacocks were not one bit better than Prewitt. They were all equally scared. Fortunately, the peacocks had but one tiger to worry about. That was Travis, a scrawny, toothless old fellow. Other tigers had better things to do than chase peacocks and end up with a mouthful of feathers. But toothless, old Travis could no longer afford to be choosy. He was down to such small game as toads and tadpoles. To him, a peacock would be a fancy feast if he could ever catch one. For such an old cat, he was pretty spry and ever so sly. So the peacocks always kept an eye cocked for old Travis. The second he made his leap, they took off like a shot to go fluttering into a treetop. It was always a close call. Once the peacocks had recovered from their fright, the first thing they did was check their tails for fear they might have lost a feather. Prewitt's scraggly nothing of a tail was something. Oh, wait. I'm going to start that page over. Once the peacocks had recovered from their fright, the first thing they did was check their tails for fear they might have lost a feather. Losing a tail feather was always heartbreaking for a peacock. Prewitt's scraggly nothing of a tail was something he would never need to worry about. At least, so he thought. But then Prewitt was in for a surprise. Love this picture of him looking up. There's Prewitt over there. Any thoughts on what his surprise could be? So we look at front. It's called The Spooky Tale of Prewitt Peacock. Let's try to figure out what the surprise might be. His tail had more growing to do, much more. One day he noticed that the eye spots had doubled in size, and fierce black eyebrows had sprouted just above them. And yet that was not the end of the tail. It continued to feather out. Before long a jagged mouth appeared just below the enormous eyes. Then finally out sprang a pair of feathery arms with wildly clutching claws. "My tail has gone wild!" exclaimed Prewitt. "It's turned into a green-eyed monster! What a terrible tale! But then, after all," he sighed, "I grew it, so I suppose I'll just have to get used to it. I only hope the other peacocks can, too." The other peacocks paid so little attention to Prewitt that a week had passed before they discovered his tail had gone wild. When they did, it hit them all at once. They let go with such terrified shrieks they could be heard all the way to Mandalay. It took 10 minutes for Phineas to settle them down. Then, in a fury, he turned to Prewitt. So they're super surprised, but it took them a whole week before they noticed. It would be like you getting your hair cut or you got something new and no one noticed. Think about how that could feel. Now, Prewitt is used to being left out, being the odd one out. And then it says, then in a fury, Phineas turned to Prewitt. He is angry. Let's find out what he's so angry about. "What's come over you, Prewitt? What on earth have you done to your tail?" he squawked. "Nothing," said Prewitt. "It just grew this way." "The thing is downright spooky," said Phineas. "It gives me the creeps." "It gives me the creeps, too," said Prewitt. "But what can I do?" "Keep it to yourself," said Phineas. "Hold it down. Living out here in the jungle is scary enough without that spooky tail of yours popping up." So if we think, see and be seen? Yes or no? Think about how Phineas is treating Prewitt. Keeping his tail down was no problem for Prewitt. Since he was not the least bit proud, letting his tail drag the ground had been a long time habit. But this was an entirely different tail, and not one bit droopy. It was springy. One afternoon, to Prewitt's surprise, up it sprang. And there was Phineas. And Phineas was furious. "Prewitt!" he shrieked. "What did I tell you?" But, stammered Prewitt, "it's nothing but a bunch of feathers. Feathers can't hurt anyone." "Feathers or not," said Phineas, "it scares the wits out of us. So you either get rid of the thing or leave the flock. Take your choice and let me know first thing in the morning." What do you think Prewitt's going to do? Is he going to stay and get rid of his tail? Or is he going to leave? What would you do if you were Prewitt? When Prewitt settled down to roost for the night in a treetop, his head was in a whirl. As awful as it is, he thought, my new tail is better than no tail at all. Yet if I keep it, I must leave the flock and go wandering off all alone. Either way would be sad, so I'd better sleep on it, then decide in the morning. As Prewitt slept, he dreamed a weird dream. Out of a swirling mist came a teary-eyed elephant with no trunk. Then a sad long-faced giraffe with no neck, followed by a sheepish-looking camel with no humps, and finally a pitiful peacock with no tail. It was Prewitt, and close behind were other peacocks all laughing at him. As the laughter exploded into wild cackling, the tailless peacock suddenly turned into a lizard and slithered under a rock. So if we think for a moment, Phineas is asking Prewitt to get rid of his tail, and then we look at all of these other animals. God created peacocks with amazing tails, and he created elephants with trunks, and giraffes with long necks, and camels with humps. They're a little bit different, but think of the imagination that God used when he was creating all of these interesting animals. I kind of hope that Prewitt decides to keep his tail, but let's find out. The next morning, Prewitt awakened in a cold sweat. After checking his tail feathers to make sure they were all there, he fluttered down to the ground to join the flock. "Well," said Phineas, "have you decided? Do you go, or does your tail go?" "We're both staying," said Prewitt, "so there." "Oh, no, you don't," cried Phineas. "Come on, everyone, grab a feather. Off with his tail." As the peacocks closed in with beaks snapping, Prewitt whirled about and took off through the jungle. The chase was on. The peacocks were very poor flyers, so it was more of a fluttering, hopping, running chase, and although Prewitt was a bit smaller with shorter legs, he was a bit quicker. By zigzagging in and out through the trees and darting under bushes and ferns, Prewitt managed to dodge his pursuers. But try as he might, he couldn't shake them. The peacocks kept right on his tail. Finally, in desperation, he headed for an open field. Prewitt figured they wouldn't dare follow. It was much too great a risk for a peacock to venture into the open. Try to think about why peacocks would not venture into the open. But dare they did. The peacocks were determined to catch Prewitt no matter what. And as he went plowing through the tall grass, they were just a few steps behind and gaining fast. Prewitt was just about to be caught when all of a sudden a tiger reared up out of the grass. It was old Travis, and just like that the chase was over. It was too late to turn back, and with no trees to flutter into the peacocks, were doomed. They were too terrified to move, so they just stood there, waiting for the finish. Then, just as the tiger was all set to spring, He let out a yowl of terror. Then, in a panic, old Travis went leaping and bounding away to disappear in the distance. The peacocks were left stunned and bewildered. What could ever frighten a tiger? They wondered as they looked frantically about. What frightened the tiger? Then, all at once, there it was. Prewitt's spooky tail. When Prewitt caught sight of the tiger, the tail sprang straight up in all its horror. There was no doubt but what Prewitt's tail had saved the day. When Phineas finally found his voice, he cried, "Prewitt! Prewitt! How can we ever repay you?" "There's no need to," said Prewitt. "It was nothing I did. It was just my tail." "Just the same," said Phineas, "you deserve a reward. How would you like to take my place? We would be proud to have you as our leader." "Yes, yes!" cried all the others, ever so proud. "Oh, no," said Prewitt. "I'm not bossy enough to be the leader. Besides, I'd rather wander about just as I please." "Then would you mind if we tag along?" asked Phineas. "Just to keep you company?" "I don't mind at all," said Prewitt. "Tag along if you like." From that day on, wherever Prewitt went, the other peacocks followed close behind. Very close. And with so many faithful followers, Prewitt finally agreed to be their leader. They were behind him 100%. Of course, Prewitt knew why, but just the same, he couldn't help being proud. Now at last Prewitt was truly as proud as a peacock. So what was the reason that all of those peacocks wanted him to be the leader and that they followed so close behind? Also, in our story, Phineas at first was definitely not see and be seen. He was angry. But what made it change? There was a cause and effect that ended up happening in here. You can always let me know if you want to. Let me know what happened to make Phineas change. Hope you enjoyed the story.